Some of us think holding on makes us strong, but sometimes it is letting go.
What if everything you believe yourself to be is nothing more than a reflection? What if the voice you call me is just an echo of something deeper, something that simply watches, in silence, while you try to keep control? There's a tiny, imperceptible moment when the mind whispers and the true self hides. It's in that gap that life actually happens, but almost no one notices. Most people keep sleeping, confusing their dreams for reality. Have you ever asked yourself who you are when no one's watching? Not the name, the role, the story, but the one who feels everything and yet is untouched by it all. Unconsciousness builds a stage where the ego plays its dramas, wins, loses, desires, fears, and calls that living. But something inside you knows there's more. That the pain you try to avoid is, in truth, the doorway to a presence the ego fears. The end of illusion isn't death, it's birth. Some call this awakening, but awakenings aren't always gentle. When the masks fall, what's left? A void. A silence that scares. Because in it there are no roles, no certainties, no ground. This is the point where many give up. When the old self dies and the authentic one begins to rise. It's a collapse, but also a liberation. And in that abyss, the observer reveals itself, the one who sees everything but is not what's seen. As the body changes, the world changes with it. Jobs lose meaning, people drift away, and what once mattered now feels heavy. It's not punishment, it's alignment. Life finally begins to vibrate at the frequency of truth. The journey is a spiral, no beginning, no end, just returns, revisions, new layers of the same mystery. Every cycle is a death and a rebirth. Every tear is a seed of the real self germinating in silence. And when acceptance arrives, something expands. You realize you didn't come here to fix the world. You came to remember who dreams it. Compassion, once distant, now breathes in every gesture. The struggle stops, time bends, and in the moment when everything seems to fall apart, something eternal awakens in you, watching, smiling, waiting for you to finally notice. There was never any separation, only consciousness playing hide and seek for the joy of finding itself again. There comes a moment when everything you thought you were starts to fall apart in silence. It's subtle, almost invisible. First, a sense of discomfort. Then the restlessness of not fitting inside your own skin anymore. What once felt solid, the certainties, the roles, the names, starts dissolving, and something in you watches, not knowing what to do. It's as if the ground beneath your story begins to move, and suddenly, the character you believed yourself to be finds itself without a script. There's resistance screaming, fear trying to hold everything together. But the more you cling, the more the false reveals itself, and the louder the silence grows. It's not life falling apart, it's the illusion of who you thought you were fading away. And when the ego starts dying, it doesn't leave quietly. It fights, it begs, it creates distractions, memories, comparisons. It whispers promises of control and safety, and for a moment, you almost believe them. But something stronger moves underneath, something that no longer wants to perform. It's consciousness, tired of pretending to be someone. Yes, there's pain, the sacred pain of letting go of a mask stitched together with fear, approval, and the need to be loved. But it's the pain of being born again. Because what dies isn't you, it's the reflection. It's the ghost that believed it was real. And when that reflection fades, what remains is something simple, raw, vast, the nothingness that holds everything. The search begins in that emptiness. There are no maps, only the echo of the questions you've always tried to silence. Who am I without my stories? What exists when thought goes quiet? This is where many turn back, mistaking silence for absence, returning to the familiar ruins of the ego. But if you stay, if you just breathe and observe, something begins to shift. Time slows down. The body vibrates differently. The mind resists. But between one thought and another, there's a gap where you feel presence. The world is still the same, yet the way you see it completely changes. It's as if the air is more alive, as if sound carries secret meanings. And slowly, the search stops being a movement outward and becomes a listening inward. The emergence of the authentic self isn't loud. It's quiet, almost invisible. You notice it in small things. The impulse to react turns into the desire to understand. The fear of losing melts into acceptance. And the gaze, once rushed, begins to truly see. Something new is pulsing, not an identity, but a clarity. What was once struggle becomes curiosity. What was once pain becomes understanding. You start recognizing an inner space where nothing needs to be proven. It's the beginning of a life in alignment. And that alignment doesn't demand the world to change, only that you stop fighting what is. Because what is, always was. You just didn't see it. But even this clarity moves in spirals. There are relapses, returns, shadows that come back to test the light. You think you've awakened, and the mind laughs. Awakening isn't a destination. It's a rhythm, a dance between forgetting and remembering. Each cycle brings a new layer of yourself to the surface, and each layer shows how much more there is to release. Sometimes it hurts to realize that the old you still whispers, still wants recognition, still fears the silence. But this time, you don't fight it. You just watch it, like watching a frightened child. Because now there's room for everything, even for what was once rejected. The journey isn't about killing the ego, but about letting it rest. And when that permission happens, everything starts to realign. The outer world begins to reflect the new vibration inside. People leave, paths open, and the body feels both the weight and the lightness of being truly inhabited. Symptoms appear, old emotions rise like waves, but they no longer scare you. They're just memories dissolving. The energy shifts, your gaze softens, and the world stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a mirror. You're not rising or falling. You're returning to yourself for the first time. Ascension is simply the soul's gravity returning to its center. And when the authentic self stabilizes, compassion becomes inevitable. Not as a moral effort, but as a natural response. You understand that all suffering is born from the same illusion that once trapped you, and judgment fades away. A quiet respect arises for every being, every pain, every attempt to be someone. Because now you know, everyone is trying to remember what they forgot. And in that recognition, true acceptance is born. Not passive acceptance, but one that embraces life with all that it brings. Light and shadow, fullness and absence, all part of the same movement that brought you here. The consciousness that awakens in you is the same that awakens in everything. The observer and the observed become one flow. There's no more inside or outside, only the act of perceiving itself. And that's when the search dissolves. Because what you were looking for has been looking through your eyes from the very start. Separation was only a dream, and awakening is simply remembering there was never any sleep. The real self doesn't need to be found, only recognized. And now, in the silence after the noise, in the calm after the fall, something in you finally understands. There's no end, only transformation. Life is an infinite breath between being and becoming. And in the instant you stop trying to understand, something sacred happens. Presence moves through you, and everything makes sense. Not because it was explained, but because it was felt. There's a moment when everything stops. Not because it's over, but because it's finally understood. The sound, the thought, the effort, everything rests in the stillness of someone who recognizes there was never separation between seeker and sought. It's there that meaning reveals itself, not as an answer, but as presence. Every fragment of the journey, every pain, every surrender converges here, in the same point where time bends to look at its own reflection. Silence isn't the end of the song. It's where the music becomes eternal vibration. You start to realize that nothing was ever lost. The fall was just the seed's way into the soil, the collapse needed for something to bloom. What looked like ruin was the beginning of a new rhythm, slower, truer. Consciousness learns that growth isn't about adding, it's about unlearning the excess, creating space for what always wanted to be born. The emptiness you feared reveals itself as full of life, a life that doesn't need labels to exist. Now, looking at the world feels like staring into a liquid mirror. The forms are still there, but something in the way you see has changed. What used to be struggle becomes communion. What used to be fear becomes reverence. Every breath tastes like a miracle, and even the pauses carry wisdom. Pain doesn't vanish, but it finds its place. Love stops being desire and becomes a state of being. Everything breathes together, inside and out, like one invisible heart pulsing between the sky and the skin. And maybe real awakening isn't about understanding, but about allowing yourself to feel. It's not about light or shadow, but about sensing the dance between them and realizing you are the space that holds it all. You see that nothing needs to change for everything to be new. You just need to be present. The authentic self isn't the one who achieves, it's the one who rests. And by resting, it becomes a light for others. What once was a search becomes a quiet invitation to remember. So, as the final image fades, something within remains lit. Truth doesn't shout, it whispers. You were never who you thought you were. And that whisper echoes, soft and steady, in the gaps of everyday life, in simple gestures, in distracted gazes. It's life calling you to be lived with awareness. If something inside you awakened, even if you don't know its name, follow that spark. Let your gesture echo. Like, comment, share, not out of habit, but out of connection. Because when one consciousness awakens, it lights many others. And that's how silence keeps singing.